My daughter didn't want to invite me to her wedding because she thought I was poor. But when she saw my new $300,000 Mercedes, she called me and said, "Come to the wedding." I was joking. I prepared a surprise for them. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My life, to an outside observer, was a study in quiet, academic modesty. My home, a charming but unassuming Tudor in a leafy older neighborhood, was not a palace of modern glass and steel. It was a repository of stories. Every surface was covered with books. Art history, poetry, first edition novels, their spines a warm, colorful tapestry that spoke of a life lived in the company of ideas. The art on my walls was not the massive, abstract investment-grade canvases that were in vogue. They were smaller, quieter pieces, a 19th century landscape I'd found in a dusty shop in Brussels, a series of intricate botanical sketches, a beautiful but unsigned portrait that I knew from my years of research was from the studio of a minor Renaissance master. These were my treasures. Their value was not in their price tag, though it was substantial, but in their history, their beauty, their soul. My name is Dr. Helena Sinclair. For 40 years I was a professor of art history at the university, a career that brought me immense joy but a modest academic salary. My late husband David was a fellow professor, a brilliant but equally modestly paid historian. We had lived a comfortable, intellectually rich but not extravagant life. What my children, what the world, did not know was that I had a secret. My quiet, academic eye for art was not just a passion, it was a gift. I could spot an undervalued masterpiece, a forgotten artist, a piece of furniture with a hidden provenance, from across a crowded auction house. Over the decades, I had quietly and with a shrewd, calculated precision, built a formidable portfolio of art and antiques. I had bought low, sold high, and reinvested. The modest professor's salary was a cover for a private, multi-million-dollar fortune I had built entirely on my own. But I had no interest in the performance of wealth. I found the modern obsession with designer labels, with luxury brands, with the constant clamoring display of status, to be deeply and almost comically vulgar. My car was a 10-year-old, reliable Volvo. My clothes were elegant, well-made pieces from small independent designers, not emblazoned with the logos of a global fashion house. My wealth was my own, a private source of security and, more importantly, a tool for the things I truly valued, supporting the arts, funding scholarships at my beloved university, and traveling the world to see its beauty firsthand. I lived a life of immense privilege, but it was a quiet internal privilege, not one that needed to be announced to the world. My daughter Maya had never understood this. She had grown up in this house of books and quiet art, and had tragically misinterpreted its understated elegance as a lack of ambition, as a sign of a small and slightly impoverished life. She loved me, I knew, but her love was tinged with a faint but constant sense of pity and embarrassment, and that pity, I was about to discover, was a far more corrosive thing than any overt dislike could ever be. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my study, a beautiful book-lined room that smelled of old paper and beeswax, cataloging a small collection of antique maps I had recently acquired. The phone rang and Maya's picture, a bright smiling selfie, lit up the screen. "Hi darling," I said, my voice full of a genuine, uncomplicated warmth. "How are you?" "I'm good, Mom, crazy busy with the wedding. You know how it is," she said. Her voice was strained, a little too bright, a little too fast. It was the voice she used when she was about to deliver bad news and wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible. The wedding. For the past 6 months it had been the central, all-consuming topic of her life. She was marrying Griffin Lancaster, an investment banker from a family whose name was synonymous with old money in the city. They were the Lancasters of the Lancaster Foundation, of the Lancaster Wing at the Art Museum. They were a dynasty, and my daughter was about to become a part of it. "I can only imagine," I said. "How is the planning coming along? Have you decided on the flowers?" "Lilies. White lilies. Very clean, very classic," she said dismissively, as if the details were an annoyance. "Listen, Mom, I'm actually calling about the wedding, about the guest list." A small cold knot of apprehension formed in my stomach. "Oh? Griffin and I and his mother, of course. We've been finalizing the numbers and it's gotten so much bigger than we expected," she said, the words tumbling out in a practiced apologetic rush. The venue has a very strict capacity, and the Lancasters have so many business associates they absolutely have to invite. You know, for political reasons. I did not know, but I was beginning to understand. So, she continued, taking a deep breath, the sound of a swimmer about to plunge into icy water. We've had to make some really tough decisions. We've had to cut it down to just essential family and the most important guests. And so, I'm so sorry, but we don't think you should come. The words, when they finally came, were so blunt, so utterly, breathtakingly cruel, that for a moment I could not process them. I felt a strange buzzing silence in my ears, the sound of my own world coming to a dead, sudden stop. You're not inviting me to your wedding? I finally managed to say, my voice a small disbelieving whisper. It's not that we don't want you there, Mom. Of course we do, she said, her voice now high and defensive. It's a very specific kind of event. We're keeping it small and cohesive. Cohesive. The word was a cold, clinical blade. I was not cohesive. I did not fit. I was the piece of the puzzle that was being discarded so the final picture could be perfect. I don't understand, Maya, I said, my voice still a whisper, the shock giving way to a deep, cold and profoundly painful confusion. I'm your mother. How can I not be essential family? There was a moment of frustrated silence on her end. The sound of a daughter who was annoyed that her mother was not making this easy, that she was not quietly and gracefully accepting her own erasure. Mom, please don't be difficult, she said, her voice sharp with impatience. You know what I mean. The Lancasters, they're a certain kind of people. Their friends are all, you know, it's a different world, a different level. The word poor was never explicitly used. It didn't have to be. It was the ghost haunting every sentence, the unspoken, ugly truth that lay beneath all her flimsy justifications. My modest home, my old Volvo, my simple academic life. In her eyes, these were not choices, they were failures. They were signs of a small and deeply embarrassing lack of financial success. And in the high-stakes world she was so desperate to enter, poverty or the appearance of it was the one unforgivable sin. You wouldn't be comfortable, Mom, she continued, her voice now shifting to one of false, pitying concern, a tone that was somehow even more insulting. Everyone will be talking about their last trip to Gestad, about the new wing their family just endowed at the hospital. What would you even talk about with them? Your books? Your old paintings? She was not just excluding me. She was belittling my entire life, my passions, the very things that brought me joy and meaning. She was framing my world as a small, provincial and deeply uninteresting place. A place that had no currency in the grand glittering society of the Lancasters. Then came the final, killing blow, the sentence that was both an explanation and an indictment. And Griffin, he's been under so much pressure from his mother. She's very traditional. She wants everything to be perfect. And your background is just, it's a little complicated for them. They're simple people in a way. They just don't understand it. Simple people. The Lancasters, with their army of lawyers and accountants and their vast global network of wealth and power, were simple. And I, a woman who could trace the provenance of a 16th century manuscript, was complicated. It was the most dishonest, most cowardly, most profoundly insulting piece of doublespeak I had ever heard. It would just be awkward for everyone. Mom, she finished, her voice now a firm final verdict. For you, for me, for them, it's just better this way. I'm sorry. The apology was as empty and as meaningless as the rest of her speech. The true reason for my exclusion was not the venue's capacity, not the cohesion of the event. It was my perceived poverty. I was a social liability. I was a blemish on the perfect, flawless brand of her new life, and I was to be scrubbed away quietly and completely. The silence that followed her final hollow apology was profound. In that moment I felt a grief so deep and so absolute, it was like a physical blow, knocking all the air from my lungs. It was not just the pain of being excluded from my only daughter's wedding, it was the devastating soul-crushing pain of being so completely and so fundamentally misunderstood by her. She did not see me. She saw only a caricature, a stereotype of the poor, academic mother that she had created in her own mind, a character she needed to believe in to justify her own shame, her own desperate social climbing. The love I had for her, the life I had tried to give her, the values I had tried to instill, they had all been rendered invisible, erased by her obsession with the superficial trappings of wealth. I could have fought. I could have screamed, wept, and unleashed a torrent of righteous maternal fury. I could have reminded her that her poor mother had paid for her Ivy League education, for her first apartment, for the very life that had allowed her to meet a man like Griffin Lancaster in the first place. But as the seconds ticked by, a strange cold clarity washed over me. What would be the point? An argument would only validate her narrative. My tears would only confirm her belief that I was an emotional, difficult woman. Pleading would only underscore my own powerlessness. And I was not powerless. In that moment of profound hurt, a new and unfamiliar feeling began to take root. It was not anger, not yet. It was a quiet, steely and absolute resolve. The kind of resolve an art historian feels when she knows, with an unshakable certainty, that a painting is a genuine masterpiece, even when the rest of the world has dismissed it as a fake. I knew my own value, and my daughter's inability to see it was not my failing, it was hers. So I decided, I would not argue, I would not plead, I would not give her the satisfaction of a scene, I would simply accept her terms. And then I would teach her a lesson, not a cruel lesson, not a lesson in revenge, but a quiet, elegant, and deeply necessary lesson in the nature of true value, and the profound difference between being rich and being wealthy. The hurt was still there, a cold, hard stone in my chest. But around it a new plan, a new purpose was beginning to form. My daughter had judged my book by its cover. I was about to write a new and far more interesting final chapter. The day after my daughter uninvited me from her life, I did not sit at home and mourn. I went to work. My first call was not to my sister to weep and seek comfort. It was to my financial advisor, a shrewd and unflappable man who had been managing my portfolio for 20 years. Michael, I said, my voice calm and all business. I need to liquidate some assets. I'm making a rather significant and somewhat unusual personal purchase. The purchase was not an impulse buy, a desperate act of retail therapy. It was a carefully considered and deeply strategic move. It was the first step in the quiet, elegant lesson I was about to teach my daughter. That afternoon I walked into the city's most exclusive Mercedes-Benz dealership. The showroom was a vast, silent, gleaming temple to modern luxury. The air smelled of expensive leather and polished chrome. Salesmen in perfectly tailored suits glided across the floor like sharks in a pristine aquarium. I, in my simple, elegant linen dress and my 10-year-old Volvo parked outside, was not their usual clientele. I was largely ignored. An invisible middle-aged woman in a sea of new money and ostentatious wealth. Finally, a young, eager salesman, clearly low on the totem pole, approached me with a polite but slightly dismissive smile. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I would like to speak to your senior client advisor. I am here to custom order a Maybach." The young man's smile faltered, replaced by a look of stunned comical disbelief. A Maybach. He had likely never sold a car that cost more than his own house. He stammered for a moment, then scurried away, returning a few minutes later with an older, more distinguished-looking man in a far more expensive suit. This man, the senior advisor, looked me up and down, his professional appraiser's eye trying to calculate my worth. He saw my simple dress, my lack of designer accessories, and I could see the flicker of skepticism in his eyes. We sat down at his large glass desk. "A Maybach is a very special vehicle, madam," he began, his tone patronizing. "The ordering process is quite extensive. And of course there is the matter of the financing." I cut him off. "I will not be requiring financing," I said calmly. I opened my handbag and took out a certified check from my private bank, which I had procured that morning. I slid it across the glass desk. "I believe this will cover the deposit." He glanced down at the check. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he read the number. The skepticism vanished, replaced by a sudden, profound and deeply respectful attention. I had just become the most interesting and most important person in his showroom. For the next hour we designed my car. I did not choose a flashy, ostentatious color. I chose a deep, elegant, almost black midnight blue. For the interior I selected the finest, softest cream-colored leather with a polished, dark walnut trim. I added every available luxury package: the reclining rear seats, the champagne cooler, the Burmester sound system. It was a vehicle of extreme but understated luxury. A car that did not shout its wealth, but whispered it. The final price tag was well over $300,000. "We will have it delivered to your home in 4 to 6 weeks, Dr. Sinclair," the advisor said, his voice now a purr of pure unadulterated deference. "No," I said, That won't be necessary. I will take delivery myself. On a very specific day. I gave him the date. It was the Friday before Maya's wedding. The strategic purchase had been made. The first piece was on the board. The 4 weeks leading up to the delivery of the car were a quiet, strange, and deeply lonely time. I did not hear from Maya. My phone remained silent. I had been excised from her life as cleanly and as efficiently as a surgeon removing a tumor. The silence was a constant, painful reminder of her rejection, but it was also a gift. It gave me the space I needed to grieve, to heal, and to prepare. The Friday before the wedding arrived. A bright, crisp autumn day. The dealership called at 9 in the morning to inform me that my Mercedes Maybach S-Class was ready. I took a taxi to the dealership. I did not want my old, reliable Volvo anywhere near this new chapter of my life. The car was waiting for me in a private delivery bay. A magnificent, gleaming beast of a machine. Its midnight blue paint so deep it looked like a pool of ink. The senior advisor, who now treated me with the reverence of a visiting monarch, spent an hour walking me through its myriad features. Then he handed me the keys. They were heavy and cool in my hand, a small solid symbol of my own hidden power. I got behind the wheel, the scent of the new leather and polished wood a heady, intoxicating perfume. I drove it off the lot, not with the giddy excitement of a new car owner, but with the calm, focused resolve of a general driving a tank into battle. I knew exactly where I was going. Maya had a routine. Every Friday at precisely 1 o'clock, she and her gaggle of equally ambitious, equally image-conscious PR friends had lunch at the Courtyard, an upscale open-air cafe in the city's most fashionable shopping district. It was a place to see and be seen, a weekly performance of their own success. I arrived at 1:15. I pulled the magnificent, silent vehicle up to the valet stand, directly in front of the cafe's bustling outdoor patio. I could see Maya and her friends at their usual prime table, their heads bent close together in a cloud of gossip and expensive perfume. I did not look at them. I stepped out of the car, the ridiculously long rear door swinging open with a silent hydraulic grace. I handed the key to the valet, a young man whose eyes were as wide and round as dinner plates. "Just for an hour or so," I said, my voice a calm, casual murmur. Then, with the entire patio of the cafe now watching, I walked past their table. I was not dressed in my usual academic attire. I was wearing a simple but exquisitely cut black dress, a pair of elegant Italian leather flats, and a pair of dark, chic sunglasses. I did not look at them. I simply gave a polite, almost imperceptible and deeply distant nod in their general direction, the kind of nod you might give to a vague, half-remembered acquaintance. I walked into the cafe, chose a small, quiet table in the corner, and took out a book I had brought with me, a collection of poetry by Rilke. The bait, in all its gleaming $300,000 glory, was now parked directly in their line of sight, and I, the quiet, poor and awkward mother, was the mysterious and suddenly very interesting woman who had just stepped out of it. I did not have to wait long. I had barely opened my book, the familiar weight of the volume a comforting anchor in the midst of my own quiet drama, when I saw the commotion begin on the patio. From the corner of my eye I could see Maya's friends pointing, their perfectly made-up faces a mask of stunned, incredulous gossip. They were pointing at the car, my car, the magnificent, impossible, and deeply disruptive object that was now the undisputed center of attention in the entire status-obsessed cafe. I could see Maya's reaction. Her head snapped up. She saw the car. Her eyes widened, her mouth falling slightly open. She looked from the car to the fawning valet who was now carefully parking it in the most prominent spot. And then her gaze, full of a wild dawning and horrified confusion, swept the patio and finally landed on me, sitting quietly in the corner, turning a page of my book. The collision of her two realities, the poor academic mother and the owner of a car that cost more than her own annual salary, was a cognitive dissonance her brain simply could not handle. Her face in that moment was a beautiful, satisfying portrait of pure, unadulterated shock. Her friends were now all looking at me, whispering behind their hands. The lunch, her weekly performance of success, was ruined. She had just been completely and very publicly upstaged by the one person in the world she had deemed too insignificant to even acknowledge. The humiliation, the confusion, the sudden desperate need for an explanation was too much for her to bear. I saw her snatch her phone from the table, her movements sharp and frantic. She said something to her friends, then stood up and walked quickly away from the table toward the back of the cafe, her face a mask of furious disbelief. A moment later, my own phone, which I had placed on the table beside my book, began to buzz. It was her. The fish had not just seen the bait, it had swallowed it whole. I let it buzz for a moment, a small quiet act of power. I marked my place in my book with a deliberate, unhurried motion. Then, I picked up the phone. "Hello, darling," I said, my voice a calm, pleasant, and utterly infuriating murmur. "Mom, what was that?" she sputtered, her voice a high, frantic, and deeply undignified squeak. There was no hello, no preamble, just a raw, unfiltered explosion of shock. "That car, that Maybach, was that you? Where did you get that?" "Oh, the new car?" I said, my voice a masterpiece of casual understatement. "Yes, that's mine. I just picked it up. Do you like it?" "I find it very comfortable." There was a moment of stunned, sputtering silence on her end. She was trying to process an impossible new piece of data, a piece that was causing her entire carefully constructed worldview to short-circuit. Her poor mother, the woman she was too embarrassed to invite to her wedding, was discussing a $300,000 car as if it were a new pair of comfortable shoes. And then the pivot, the desperate, clumsy, and utterly transparent attempt to recover, to recalibrate, to get back on the right side of this new and suddenly very interesting reality. The frantic, screeching shock in her voice vanished, replaced by a bright, loud, and breathtakingly false cheerfulness. "Oh, Mom, you're so funny." Maya's voice, now a high, tinkling cascade of forced artificial laughter, came pouring through the phone. "A new car? You are just full of surprises." The pivot was so abrupt, so shameless, it was almost impressive. The angry, confused woman from 30 seconds ago was gone, replaced by a doting, amused daughter enjoying her mother's charmingly eccentric behavior. "And listen," she continued, her voice now dropping to a tone of warm, conspiratorial intimacy, as if we were sharing a wonderful private joke about the wedding. "Oh my God, you are going to kill me. I can't believe you actually fell for it." I held the phone a little away from my ear, my expression, I am sure, one of polite clinical interest. I was a psychologist, listening to a patient construct a new and deeply delusional reality in real time. "Fell for what, darling?" I asked, my voice a calm, quiet prompt. "The whole thing," she shrieked, her laughter now bordering on the hysterical. "Not inviting you. It was a joke. A silly, stupid prank. Griffin and I cooked it up. We were just trying to tease you. We were going to call you tomorrow and say surprise. Oh, you must have thought we were serious. I feel terrible." The lie was so audacious, so utterly, completely, and transparently false that for a moment I was speechless. She was trying to gaslight me, to rewrite the history of our painful, humiliating conversation, to transform her own cruel, calculated act of exclusion into a light-hearted prank. She was not apologizing for her cruelty. She was, in effect, blaming me for my inability to appreciate her sophisticated sense of humor. "You were joking," I repeated, my voice a flat, deadpan echo. "Yes, completely," she said, her relief that I was playing along a palpable thing, even over the phone. "Of course I want you at my wedding, Mom. You're my mother. I was just being a brat. You have to forgive me, and you absolutely positively have to come." The desperation in her voice was a raw, naked thing. She was not just re-inviting me, she was pleading. The poor mother, the social liability she had been so ashamed of, had just been revealed to be a woman of significant and very public wealth, and that was a woman she absolutely positively needed to have at her wedding. My presence was no longer a liability, it was an asset. A very, very valuable asset. The bait had been taken, the hook was set. Now it was time to reel her in. I let the silence on the line stretch for a moment, allowing her to stew in the frantic, hopeful anxiety of her own lie. I could almost hear her heart pounding, waiting for my verdict. Then I let out a small, soft, and equally false laugh of my own. "Oh, Maya," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of a slightly flustered, deeply relieved mother. "You really had me worried for a moment there. A joke, of course. You always did have a wicked sense of humor." I was accepting her lie. I was giving her the out she so desperately needed. I was allowing her to believe that she had successfully and cleverly managed the situation. "Oh, thank God!" she breathed, the relief in her voice so profound it was almost a sob. "I felt so awful. Of course I want you there, Mom. More than anyone." "Well then, of course I will be there, darling," I said, my voice full of a warm maternal grace. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The performance was complete. The new narrative had been established. The uninvitation had never happened. It was all just a silly prank. We were a happy, normal, loving family once more. And then, to sweeten the pot, to ensure that the hook was not just set but swallowed whole, I decided to add the final irresistible piece of bait. "And I'm so glad, Maya," I said, my voice dropping to a tone of quiet, loving sincerity. "Because, to be honest, I've been planning to give you and Griffin a rather substantial wedding gift. Something to really help you start your new life together, and it would have been so awkward to give it to you if I wasn't at the wedding." There was a sharp intake of breath on her end of the line. "A gift?" she asked, her voice now a low, hungry purr. "Mom, you don't have to do that." A polite, but utterly meaningless, protest. "I want to," I said. "You're my only daughter. And I've been doing rather well for myself lately. It's something significant. A real foundation for your future." I did not specify what the gift was. I did not mention a number. I let her own greedy, materialistic imagination do the work for me. In her mind, I was sure. She was already picturing it. The deed to a house. A check with an obscene number of zeros. A stock portfolio. The possibilities were endless, and they were all spectacularly, wonderfully expensive. "Mom," she said, her voice now thick with a deep and deeply false emotion. I don't know what to say. I love you so much." "I love you too, darling," I said. "Now, I must run. I have an appointment. I will see you at the wedding." I hung up the phone. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my now cold coffee. The trap was no longer just baited. It was set. It was armed. And my dear, ambitious and utterly clueless daughter had just, with a heart full of avarice, walked right into the center of it. The 2 weeks leading up to the wedding were a study in contrasts. On the surface, I was playing the part of the reconciled and now eagerly anticipated mother of the bride. I went with Maya for the final fitting of her wedding dress, a ridiculously expensive confection of lace and silk. I offered the appropriate oohs and ahs. I attended her bridal shower, a stilted high society affair, and I brought a tasteful and appropriately expensive gift. Maya, for her part, was a completely different person. The distant, pitying daughter was gone, replaced by a loving, attentive, and almost suffocatingly devoted one. She called me every day. She sent me pictures of the floral arrangements. She asked for my opinion on the seating chart. She was not just including me, she was showcasing me. I was no longer the embarrassing poor mother. I was the mysterious wealthy matriarch, the secret weapon she was now eager to deploy in her ongoing campaign for social status. Beneath this placid performative surface, however, I was engaged in a very different kind of preparation. My days were not filled with wedding planning, but with a series of quiet, discreet meetings with my own team. I met with my financial advisor, Michael, the man who had helped me build my fortune. We sat in his quiet, wood-paneled office, and I laid out my plan. He listened, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. "Helena," he said when I had finished, "it is a work of art, a masterpiece of financial and psychological warfare." Together we began the process of restructuring my portfolio, of liquidating certain assets and moving the funds, preparing the substantial gift for its final destination. Then, I met with Mr. Charles Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood was the director of the Sinclair Foundation, the philanthropic arm of my fortune, the part of my life that was so secret, not even my own children knew it existed. For years, I had been quietly funding a scholarship for underprivileged art history students at my old university. It was my passion, my legacy, my way of giving back to the world that had given me so much. Mr. Blackwood was a polished, articulate, and deeply compassionate man in his late 50s. He was not just an employee, he was a partner, a man who shared my belief in the transformative power of education in the arts. I explained the situation to him, not the messy emotional details, but the broad strokes. "I am redirecting a significant portion of my personal assets into a new and much larger endowment," I told him, "and I would like to announce it at my daughter's wedding." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his calm professional demeanor. "At the wedding, Dr. Sinclair? That's a very public forum." "Yes," I said, "it is. That is the point." I laid out the plan. I would be endowing a new scholarship, a monumental one in honor of my daughter's marriage. It would be called the Lancaster Sinclair Scholarship for the Arts. I was using their names, weaving them into the very fabric of my surprise, and I wanted him, Mr. Blackwood, to be the one to announce it. "I will arrange for you to be an honored guest at the wedding," I explained. "And at the appropriate moment during the reception toasts, you will be invited to the stage to make a special presentation on behalf of the bride's mother." Mr. Blackwood began to smile. a slow, dawning, and deeply appreciative smile, as he understood the sheer elegant genius of the plan. He was not just an instrument of my philanthropy. He was to be the unsuspecting and utterly respectable instrument of my quiet, devastating surprise. We spent the rest of the meeting planning his speech, preparing the oversized ceremonial check, and choreographing the presentation down to the last detail. The surprise was prepared, the stage was set, all that was left was the final, public performance. On the day of the wedding, I arrived not with the quiet, unobtrusive modesty my daughter had once so feared, but with the calm, deliberate, and head-turning grandeur of a woman who knew her own worth. The venue was a lavish, old-money country club, a place of sprawling green lawns, ivy-covered stone walls, and a hushed, exclusive atmosphere. As I guided the magnificent midnight blue Maybach up the long, winding driveway, I could see the guests mingling on the terrace, their pastel silks and linen suits a perfect picture of a summer society wedding. I pulled up to the grand, columned entrance. The young valet, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror at the sight of the $250,000 vehicle, rushed to open my door. I stepped out. I was not wearing the simple academic attire Maya so despised. I had, with the help of a very expensive personal shopper, acquired a breathtaking custom-made couture gown in a shade of deep amethyst. It was simple, elegant, and radiated a kind of quiet, powerful luxury that was far more intimidating than any flashy logo-covered garment could ever be. My only jewelry was a pair of antique diamond and sapphire earrings, a piece I had acquired from a royal estate auction years ago. I handed the valet the heavy, cool key to the Maybach. "Please be careful with her," I said with a small, calm smile. "She's new." As I walked up the grand stone steps to the terrace, a hush fell over the small groups of guests I passed. Heads turned, conversations faltered. I could hear the whispers, the murmur of "who is that?" I was not just another guest. I was an event. I saw Maya and her new father-in-law, a formidable, silver-haired man who exuded an aura of immense power and generational wealth, standing near the entrance. Maya saw me. Her jaw literally dropped. She was staring at me as if I were a ghost, a beautiful, impossibly elegant, and terrifyingly wealthy ghost from a life she knew nothing about. She rushed to my side, her face a mask of shocked, delighted, and deeply opportunistic surprise. "Mom," she gushed, her voice loud enough for everyone around them to hear, "you look absolutely breathtaking. Doesn't she, Mr. Lancaster?" The old man's shrewd, appraising eyes swept over me, from my couture gown to my antique earrings. He was a man who understood the subtle language of real wealth, and he was clearly and deeply impressed. "Your daughter is right, Dr. Sinclair," he said, his voice a low, appreciative rumble. "You are the vision of elegance." I had not only passed their test, I had just aced it. I was not the embarrassing poor mother. I was the mysterious and obviously very wealthy matriarch, and I had just become the most interesting person at the party. My grand entrance was complete. I had their full and undivided attention. The transformation in my daughter was as swift as it was absolute. The distant, pitying child who had been ashamed of my very existence was gone, replaced by a fawning, attentive, and almost suffocatingly devoted acolyte. For the rest of the afternoon, Maya was glued to my side. She held my arm, she fetched me champagne, she laughed a little too loudly at my quiet, academic jokes. She was not just my daughter, she was my publicist, my handler, my primary promoter in the high-stakes social marketplace of her own wedding. She proudly and loudly introduced me to every influential person in the room. Her arm linked through mine. She would guide me from one cluster of wealthy guests to another. "You simply have to meet my mother," she would say, her voice ringing with a newfound and entirely fraudulent pride. "This is my wonderful mother, Dr. Helena Sinclair." She would then proceed to list my credentials. Credentials she had previously dismissed as boring and irrelevant, but which she now presented as badges of high cultural status. "She's a retired art history professor from the university, a leading expert on the Renaissance. She's just been traveling in Italy, haven't you, Mom?" I was no longer the awkward provincial mother. I was the distinguished academic, the world traveler, the brilliant art historian. I was an object of intellectual and, more importantly, financial curiosity. Griffin, her new husband, was equally transformed. The polite but subtly condescending young man who had made cutting remarks about my simple background was now a model of deferential son-in-lawly devotion. He would rush to pull out my chair. He would listen to my stories about art history with a look of rapt, intense interest, his eyes shining with a deep and deeply false respect. But it was their constant, not so subtle references to my generosity that were the true purpose of their performance. My mother has just been so incredibly supportive of us, Maya would say to Griffin's formidable mother, a woman draped in diamonds and an air of icy disapproval. She has a wonderful surprise for us later, a very substantial gift to help us start our new life. She has the heart of a true philanthropist, Griffin would add, giving my arm a squeeze. They were not just celebrating me, they were priming the pump. They were building the narrative. They were creating a public expectation of a grand financial gesture. They were so blinded by their own greed, so certain of the windfall that was coming their way, that they had no idea they were in fact the chief architects of their own impending and very public humiliation. I simply smiled, played my part as the benevolent, mysterious matriarch, and let them build their stage. The reception was a study in opulent old money taste. The country club ballroom was a sea of white lilies and flickering candlelight. A small, elegant orchestra played softly in the corner. The meal was a multi-course affair, served with a quiet, flawless efficiency. After the dinner plates were cleared and the champagne was poured for the toasts, the band leader, a man with a smooth, professional smile, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "at this time we have a very special presentation in honor of the happy couple on behalf of the mother of the bride, Dr. Helena Sinclair." A wave of expectant murmurs rippled through the room. This was it. The moment Maya and Griffin had been building towards all evening. The moment the substantial gift would be revealed. A large white screen was lowered from the ceiling at one end of the ballroom. Maya and Griffin were beckoned to the stage. To stand beside the screen. They went eagerly, their faces beaming with a smug, greedy anticipation that was almost painful to watch. They stood hand in hand, the very picture of a golden couple about to be showered with yet more good fortune. They were expecting a grand public display of my wealth, a final definitive confirmation of their new, elevated status. I could see it in their eyes. They were picturing a slideshow of a new condominium, the deed to a beach house, a wire transfer confirmation for $1 million, projected for all the world to see. Maya caught my eye from the stage and gave me a small conspiratorial wink, a gesture of shared, triumphant understanding. "This is it," her look said. "This is the moment that proves I was right to let you come." I simply smiled back, a calm, serene, and utterly unreadable smile. The audience was settled. The stage was set. The two lead actors were in position, ready for their triumphant final scene. They had no idea that the play was not a comedy, but a tragedy, and they were the ones about to meet their downfall. Instead of me walking to the stage, another figure emerged from the side of the room and approached the microphone. It was Mr. Charles Blackwood, looking distinguished and deeply respectable in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. The guests, assuming he was a family member or a financial advisor, watched with polite, expectant curiosity. Mr. Blackwood, with his years of experience in public speaking and fundraising, had a calm, commanding presence. He smiled warmly at the crowd, then at the happy couple. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice a rich, articulate baritone. "My name is Charles Blackwood, and I am the director of the Sinclair Foundation at the university. For many years I have had the profound honor of working with one of the most generous and most discreet philanthropists in our city, Dr. Helena Sinclair." He paused, letting the words foundation and philanthropist sink in. I could see the confusion on Griffin's face, the flicker of anxious uncertainty in Maya's eyes. This was not the script they had been expecting. "Dr. Sinclair believes, as do I," Mr. Blackwood continued, his voice full of a genuine, heartfelt passion, "that the greatest gift one can give is the gift of opportunity, the gift of education. For years her quiet generosity has funded scholarships that have changed the lives of dozens of brilliant, underprivileged art history students." He then turned his warm, beaming smile on Maya and Griffin. "And tonight, in honor of this beautiful celebration of love and new beginnings, Dr. Sinclair has decided to make her most significant and transformative gift to date." This was it. The moment of the reveal. Maya's anxious expression relaxed, replaced by a renewed, beaming confidence. "Aha," her face seemed to say, "a big public donation, and then, the real gift for us." Mr. Blackwood gestured to the large screen beside him. "It is my profound and overwhelming honor," he announced, his voice booming with emotion, "to announce the establishment of a monumental new endowment at the university. In honor of the marriage of her daughter Maya to Griffin Lancaster, Dr. Helena Sinclair has pledged $5 million to establish the new Lancaster Sinclair Scholarship for the Arts." On the screen behind him, a beautiful professionally designed graphic appeared. It was not a picture of a house or a bank statement. It was a picture of an oversized ceremonial check, made out not to Maya and Griffin, but to the scholarship fund. The surprise was revealed. The gift had been given, but it was not a gift for them. It was a gift for generations of future students they would never meet. It was a legacy, and it was a lesson. The moment the image of the $5 million check flashed on the screen, the room, which had been in a state of quiet, expectant curiosity, erupted in a thunderous, spontaneous wave of applause. It was a sound far more genuine, far more enthusiastic than any of the polite clapping that had occurred throughout the evening. This was something the guests, particularly Griffin's wealthy philanthropic family, understood and deeply respected. This was not just a vulgar display of cash. This was a statement of legacy, of class, of a deep and serious commitment to the community. This was an act of true, old money elegance. My poor, awkward mother had just in a single magnificent gesture, proven herself to be more a part of their world than they could have ever imagined. Griffin's father, a man who had barely acknowledged my presence all evening, was on his feet, applauding vigorously, a look of profound and genuine admiration on his face. Griffin's mother was dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, deeply moved by this incredible act of public generosity. But on the stage, a very different drama was unfolding. The beaming, triumphant smiles on Maya and Griffin's faces had frozen, then cracked, then collapsed into identical masks of pure, unadulterated and deeply, deeply ugly horror. They stared at the screen, at the $5 million that was not for them, and their faces were a perfect public portrait of raw, naked greed and profound disappointment. They had been expecting a windfall, a key to their own private kingdom of luxury, and they had received a plaque, a public honor, a legacy that they would never, ever be able to touch. The applause, the admiration, the respect of the entire room was directed at the stage. But it was not for them. It was for me. And they were trapped there, on that stage, forced to stand and accept the congratulations of a room full of people who were celebrating their profound and very public financial disappointment. Maya's face was a wreck of conflicting emotions. Her PR-trained mind knew she was supposed to be smiling, to be proud, to be grateful. But the greedy, entitled child within was having a tantrum. Her smile was a grotesque, stretched rictus of pain, her eyes wide with a look of pure animalistic panic. She was a woman who had just had her entire beautiful, wealthy future publicly snatched away from her, and she was being forced to applaud her own execution. The public reckoning was absolute, and it was devastating. As the thunderous applause finally began to subside, Mr. Blackwood, his face beaming with a genuine heartfelt joy, turned the microphone over to me. I walked to the stage, my steps calm and unhurried, the amethyst of my gown shimmering in the warm spotlight. I took the microphone. I did not look at my daughter or her new husband, who were standing beside me like two beautiful frozen statues of greed. I looked out at the crowd, at the sea of impressed, admiring faces. "Thank you, Charles," I said, my voice warm and gracious. "And thank you all for your wonderful, generous reaction." I gave a small, elegant speech. I spoke of my late husband, a fellow academic, and our shared belief in the power of education. I spoke of my passion for art, and my desire to share that passion with a new generation of scholars who might not otherwise have the chance. "A wedding," I said, my voice full of a serene, quiet wisdom, "is a celebration of the future, and I believe that the greatest wealth we can ever possess, the greatest gift we can ever give, is the opportunity we provide for others to build a beautiful future of their own." My words were a final, gentle, and utterly devastating lesson. I was defining my own values, my own understanding of wealth, in a way that was a direct and public repudiation of their shallow, materialistic worldview. I finished by raising my own glass. So please, join me in a toast, not to my gift, but to the future, to all the young artists and scholars who will in the years to come enrich our world, and of course to Maya and Griffin. I wish them a lifetime of a different and far more important kind of wealth. Happiness. The room applauded again, deeply moved by my grace and generosity. Under the cover of the applause, I turned to my daughter. I looked at her beautiful ruined face, her eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and a dawning terrible understanding. My expression was not one of triumph, it was one of sad final pity. Then, as the applause continued, I gave a small polite wave to the crowd. I handed the microphone back to the band leader, and I made my graceful exit. I walked off the stage, through the still applauding crowd, and out of the ballroom. I did not look back. I left my daughter and my new son-in-law standing on that stage, bathed in the warm public glow of admiration for a gift that they would never touch. I had left them with a legacy they could not spend, an honor they could not sell, and a very public lesson in the true meaning of the word poor. The valet brought my Maybach around. The car was cool and quiet, and smelled of leather and success. My success. I got behind the wheel and drove away from the country club. Away from the wedding, away from the life I had once known. I was not a sad, lonely, and rejected mother. I was Dr. Helena Sinclair, and I had just made the acquisition of a lifetime.